This is for everything that was and is Comic Con. Hey guys, it's Comic Relief Crusader, and today we got a really good show for you tonight. A really good show. As we look back at 1975 at the San Diego Comic Con, the same Comic Con that's been going on for 50 years. And I believe that this kind of information, this kind of show should be preserved for posterity and for history. And so I'm going to share with you a show that was recorded back in 1975 with various guests of people that you might know, such as Ray Bradbury, or, well, I don't know, maybe this guy, Stan Lee, or how about Jack Kirby and Jim Steranko? Special interview with Jerry Siegel and Joanne Siegel. Chuck Norris, the one and only, June Foray, who you might remember as Rocky the Squirrel from Rocky and Bullwinkle, or Daws Butler, well, who you might remember as Huckleberry Hound, Robert Bloch, who speaks about getting a letter back from H.P. Lovecraft, and the immortal Will Eisner. So stick around. It's going to be long, but you know what? It's going to be worth it. So, that being said, enjoy the show.
Everyone who is here tonight, the reason why they're in the field they're in, they went into it for romantic reasons. They went into it to help themselves to grow and become certain things, and because of their influence, they romanced us into wanting to live. That's what it's all about. Your love of comic strips and the kind of art that we're all fascinated with is the love of high romance, the love of life itself. The ability for each of us who works in the field, one way or the other, to say to you, yes, there's much negativity. Yes, there's much to criticize in the world. But there's much excitement and much beauty. And people like the cartoonists, the illustrators I'm sharing this evening here with, do that sort of thing for us. They make us want to go on living. It's a very important thing.
What better way to open this record on the San Diego Comic Convention than to have science fiction author Ray Bradbury's comment on comic fandom? That was spoken at the banquet on the third day of the convention, August 2nd, 1975. The San Diego Comic Convention was held July 29th through August 3rd, 1975, at the El Cortez Hotel in downtown San Diego. I'm Alan Light, and I'll be narrating this collection of highlights from that convention. Now, let's hear some more of what Ray Bradbury had to say.
People are always saying to me, are you still doing science fiction? And of course the answer is yes. I've got my play Leviathan 99, which is going to reopen in Paris this fall, thank God, because we did a lousy production of it up in L.A. Those of you who saw it there, we all died together, didn't we? And it's sad, you know, you try to do your best and suddenly you discover that you haven't done a good job of casting. And everything goes wrong. And you stand there and you watch the rehearsals and you know that you're at your own wake. Huh? And you don't want to say anything to your director or your actors. And I remember they brought in a large turntable for this play. And for those of you who don't know what the play is about, it is Moby Dick in the future. It is Moby Dick carried ahead roughly 150, 200 years from now. And it's a story of a great white comet that comes down through the universe once every 30 years. And it's a story of this blind captain of space who goes out to confront this comet because the comet put out his eyes when he was a young man. So you take the Moby Dick mythology, you take the Shakespearean concept, and you put it ahead into the future. And we had all sorts of wonderful, grandiose ideas. I thought, well, for the first time, how wonderful it would be if we could borrow a sound stage from a studio and use this to put on a play with. No one else had ever thought of it before. And I said, my God, how strange that the studios have been sitting there for 30, 40, 50 years, and no one has ever had brains enough to go to a studio head and say, Mr. Goldwyn, Mr. Mayer, whoever, can we use this soundstage and put on a play and put out all of outer space into it? So we did this, and we costumed it, and we put the stars in the sky, and we built a large turntable in the center of the stage, and we built a set on top of that. And I looked at that set, and I thought to myself, it won't move. It just won't move. But what do I know about these things? I'm not a technician. And so I didn't say anything. But secretly, I said to myself, the damn thing won't move. And they finished building it, and I kept my mouth shut like a fool. And we got into rehearsals about a week before the opening. And we pressed the button, and the damn thing wouldn't move. And it was that sort of disaster, day after day, week after week, in putting on Leviathan. And finally we opened, and not only did we get reviewed badly, but we got reviewed badly 3 times in 1 week. They wouldn't leave us alone. They came back and kicked us every 3rd day. And then they buried us and dug us up and buried us again. But in the meantime, I've been doing all kinds of new short stories. I've written a short story about myself and George Bernard Shaw in outer space, which I think is kind of great, don't you? Isn't that a wonderful company for outer space? Yeah. I've done a story about a starship moving out toward the stars, and on board this ship, you have all these guys carrying along with them their super audio animatronic sexual girl dolls, right? Everyone on the trip has their own girl robot, except me. And who do I have? Well, every night I sneak down below decks, down by the machinery, and I find this robot of an old man sitting there in the shadows. And I speak to him all alone, and I say, Mr. Shaw, George Bernard Shaw, and he sits upright. This robot blinks its eyes and looks around and says, by God, sir, I do accept it. And I said, what? He says, the universe, it thinks, therefore I am. And I sit there below decks in the shadow of the machinery, and I converse with Mr. Shaw, my dear hero, my good friend. And everyone else is upstairs playing, and I'm down there talking with this old man for whom I have this fantastic love going back a good many years in my life. And we go up above deck, and we look out this large window into space. And we look at all the stars of the universe, and we look on out toward Andromeda and Alpha Centauri. And I finally say to him, Mr. Shaw, say it. He says, say what? He says, go on, say it. You know what I want to hear. And he looks out into space. He says, what is mankind in the universe? What is this mysterious thing that we are? This flesh and blood that dreams itself human. What are we? Huh? We are energy and matter transmuting itself into imagination and will. Energy and matter changing itself over into imagination and will. We are the thing that knows itself in the universe. We waken in the universe. We examine ourselves. We're curious at the miracle. And this is what we are. And I sit there enchanted with this. And I say it again. And he keeps repeating it and repeating it. And then along the way, all the other men on this journey become jealous of my relationship with Mr. Shaw. And somebody tampers with his robot and kills him. They jiggle a wire, and I come back up late one night, and I go back down to visit with Mr. Shaw, and he's dead. At which point, the meteor shower hits the ship. Isn't that convenient? Yes. I am as full of coincidences as Mr. Dickens, and I'll be damned if I'll explain them to you. But I just have time to clap on my oxygen unit and get some food, and the whole ship blows up. Then everyone is scattered out into space. And I'm falling down through space, and I realize I have 180 days to exist with my food and my oxygen. And I keep saying over and over to myself, oh, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Shaw, Mr. Shaw. And then, like a gift from God, this figure tumbles down through space, and here comes the robot Shaw, end over end over end, and he speaks to me as he arrives, no sooner asked for than I am here. I said, Mr. Shaw, you're alive! He says, oh, yes, the accident jiggled everything back together again. Yeah. He says, so I hold on to him, and we fall down through space together. And I realize I have 180 days of life. He has 10,000 years. But what a way to fall through the universe. And that's the end of the story, huh? Yeah. Yeah. So, I've sent that story out. It hasn't sold yet. It's been rejected by everyone. Is that ridiculous? Isn't that stupid? It happens all the time still. For those of you who are young writers, I want you to know I'm still collecting rejection slips.
And now, here's professional comics writer Marv Wolfman introducing the publisher of Marvel Comics, Mr. Stan Lee.
I'm supposed to introduce Stan, and there's quite a bit I could say about him. However, he is my boss, and he has the power of hiring and firing. So I'm just going to say, here's Stan Lee.
He's fired. Come back here. I may have to answer a question, and this is a veritable fount of information. Thank you, culture lovers. I am with an outfit called Marvel Comics. And if you hadn't done that, you'd have seen a grown man standing up here weeping. You're liable to see it anyway, because as I look at this sea of hostile faces, I'm saying to myself, what on earth am I going to talk about for the 3/4 of an hour that we've all been sentenced to? So why don't I ask you, because I'm equally inept at any kind of speaking. It doesn't matter what I talk about, I do it badly, so I might as well talk about what you'd like to hear. Does anybody just want to shout out something that they'd like to hear about, so at least I'll know I'm saying something that at least somebody wants to hear? All right, I heard the Silver Surfer. I heard how'd you get, but I didn't hear the rest. How did I get started? All right, let's do it that way. Thanks a lot. You guys may keep me alive up here. How did I get started? And then we segue into the Silver Surfer. Well, when I was a kid many decades ago, just to show you how things never work out, I wanted to be an actor. And they had something called the WPA Federal Theater. It was part of Franklin Roosevelt's NRA New Deal. And it was to keep guys off the streets and from stealing hubcaps and so forth. And they set up little theatrical groups, and I joined one. Orson Welles was also a part of this thing, and many other big names. The only thing is the other guys stayed with it, but I had to make a living, and it didn't pay too well. So I got a lot of very exotic jobs in writing, because I always was fairly facile at it. I got one job writing obituaries for a news service, obituaries of famous people who are still alive. You know, when a celebrity dies, an hour later there's a special issue of a paper, and his whole life story is in the paper, and you probably wondered, how did they ever write this so fast? Well, that thing's been on file for years. So then I heard there was a job open at Marvel Comics, which was then called Timely Comics for a reason that nobody ever figured out. And Jack Kirby and Joe Simon were practically the whole staff, and they needed I better watch what I say, because I never know, Jack may be here. Anyway, he and Joe were virtually the whole staff. Jack sat at a table behind a big cigar, and he was drawing. Joe stood up behind another big cigar, and he would ask Jack, you know, you comfortable? Do you want some more ink? Is your brush okay? Is the pencil all right? And then Joe would go out and yell at me for a while. And that was the way we spent our days. I was a gopher. I'd go for the coffee, for the broom, for Jack's cigars. And they also let me write some copy. And little by little, when they found out that I could spell and I knew which end of a sentence to put a period at, they started exploiting me, just the way I've done with Marv Wolfman and everybody else over the years. And I'd start writing stories. Now, in those days, you know, the whole world is totally illogical, and as you probably know, because many of you even live in the same world, nothing makes sense. Now, in those days, the post office had a rule. The rule was a magazine couldn't be called a magazine unless it had 2 pages of text. Now, that means a comic book, which is mostly drawings, had to have 2 pages of just type so that it could be called a magazine. Now, you may be wondering, in your innocence, why do they care if it's called a magazine or not? Well, the reason is if your magazine is called a magazine by the post office, it can be mailed to people at a cheaper rate. So we wanted it called a magazine. I didn't really care because I was still a gopher, but somebody way up there wanted it called a magazine. So I was writing these 2-page text features in order to convince the government that Timely Comics was publishing magazines. So there I was making $11 a week, and this whole company rested on these 2 little page features that I wrote every month, and it gave me a great feeling of grandeur and importance. All right, after a while, Joe and Jack, for reasons that history will one day record, left Timely Comics, and the publisher, a stalwart named Martin Goodman, who owned the company and all that his eye beheld, namely me at the moment, looked around at his vast empire, and he saw this one skinny kid with the broom in one hand and a typewriter in the other, and he said, "Hey, where's the rest of my staff?" And I said, "I'm it." And at that time, I was about 16 and a half, and he said, "Well, somebody's got to edit these books." He said, "Stan, can you kind of hold down the job till I get somebody else?" And I said, "Well, what'll it pay?" And I think I was offered a half $1 a page more, or a week more, or something. And to me, that was like gold. Still is. And I said, "Okay, I'll take it." So he went off into the outside world to seek another editor. And I was now Stan Lee, boy editor pro tem. See, I have a terrible problem. I don't know what I am. Sometimes when people say to me, strangers, they'd have to be strangers, obviously, because a guy who isn't a stranger knows what I am. But as a stranger might say, "Hey, what do you do?" My first impulse is to say, as I've said all my life, I'm a writer, or sometimes I'd say I'm an editor. And now I got to say I'm a publisher. But I'm not really anything, because publishers are guys who just handle the business end of a business. And I don't really just handle the business end. The company that owns us has 50 million businessmen who check numbers and charts and graphs, and they do all of that. I'm not an editor anymore because I'm lucky enough to have Marv and Archie Goodwin doing the black and whites and so forth. So I'm not the editor. I don't do any more comic book writing. And I'm not really sure what it is I do. I know I go to the office every day and I'm busy as hell, but I don't know what I'm doing, but I don't have time to write a Spider-Man movie. Now, I'm supposed to be writing another movie with this friend of mine, Alain Resnais, that we've been talking about for 3 years, and I keep putting him off, and he keeps running around to Europe and doing other films, and when he finishes each one, he says, "Stan, can we do it now?" And, do one more film, Alan. I'm sure by the time that's finished, we'll get together. He just finished Stavisky, which some of you might have seen, and he's doing a new one now that'll be filmed in New England. Oh, I got a scoop for you. He says he has a role in it for me. I'm afraid to ask what kind, but you'll be seeing me on the silver screen from coast to coast very shortly. And I hope I'll be a hero. At any rate, when the Spider-Man film was discussed, it was discussed, perhaps I would write it, and I don't have the time. And then the fellow who's producing it, Steve Krantz, he knows Brian Clemens, who has done The Avengers, and is a pretty good writer, and Brian was interested, and he said if I work with Brian, he would have Brian do it, and I said, fine. But I have another scoop for you. This is a day for scoops for us, but you got to promise it must go no further than this room. So you're all under oath. I'm not sure now that Brian is going to write it because we've changed the entire concept of the Spider-Man movie. And it's not going to merely be a story of Spider-Man the way it was planned to be, but it's going to be something more, not quite, but more in the direction of a rock opera film than a regular story, you see. And we're discussing it now, and there's tremendous interest in Hollywood among some very big people. And in fact, I was just on the phone to Krantz last night, and we're trying to work out the details. You'll read all about it in the bullpen, or if you want to hear about it sooner, it's very easy. Get together, pool your money, have another convention here in about a month, invite me, and I'll tell you all about it. But otherwise, you'll read about it in the bullpen. But anyway, that's the story about why, at the moment, I'm not writing the Spider-Man movie. I don't know where we'll be in a year or two, but I would think that wherever we are, it's going to be at a most exciting plateau, and I hope that you're all going to be there with us. Now, let me close by saying that if you enjoyed this half as much as I do, and did, you had a really good time, so I want to compliment you on your choice of speakers, and with one final Excelsior, thank you all very much. Thank you.
Following Stan Lee's talk came the Captain America panel with the creator of Captain America, Mr. Jack Kirby.
Captain America for us was a kind of a landmark in our own lives because it did well. It was a very, very valid theme, and it gave us a chance to exercise our own fantasies because we believe in the validity of comics because we believe that every one of us has to balance whatever we see in reality with a little bit of fantasy. I believe that's how we live. Speaking for myself, I'm never going to battle it out with six or eight guys. And because I know if I do, I'm really going to get clobbered. But I know that in doing Captain America, I can take a lot of license and experience that kind of thing and have a lot of fun with it. Captain America was really a sort of choreographed ballet, and it was especially in the fight scenes, and it avoided the ugly part of life and distilled what I thought was the fine part of human endeavor in any situation. So it was an enjoyment for me to do, and especially when I came back to Marvel during the late 50s and began to do Captain America again. I had the opportunity of doing him as a human being, and because he had been gone for a certain period of time and revived, and I had to create a link between this span of time, and I had the opportunity of creating another facet to his character. I enjoyed doing that. So if you have any questions or if you have any insights that you'd like to voice yourself, I think this opportunity, Jim Steranko, would like to add a little to possibly what I've said.
Thank you, Jack. Well, while you were talking, I had an idea, and I wanted to sort of follow through with it. With the indulgence of this group. You know, one of the things that makes Kirby what he is a very modest man. And I hope I'm not embarrassing you by saying this, Jack. But Kirby is very simply the world's greatest comic book artist. Not only now, but he's the greatest comic book artist who will ever live, ever, any time in the history of. Now, let me tell.
Well, if you have any questions, we'll be glad to answer them and do our best. This young man here. Yes, I'm doing Captain America now. And
Stand up and say that.
yes, if you'd please stand up so we can hear you better, we'd appreciate it very much. Yes, right there, this gentleman. Oh, for the Falcon? I'm keeping the Falcon as a teammate. I feel that the Falcon is important. And the adventure they're engaged in now, and I hope you follow it, is slanted toward the bicentennial, and the climax of it will occur when the bicentennial comes about. And like I told a few people, it's going to be gloriously violent, and they're going to wind up waving the American flag, and I think you'll probably maybe stand up and cheer when you're reading it wherever you are. Yes, sir. Well, I have my own ideas about Silver Surfer, and I won't discuss them myself until I talk with Stan about them, and when the opportunity arises, I'm certainly going to give him my views and accept his views, and possibly we'll come up with something very, very interesting. And like I say, I would follow the Marvel magazines, and we might spring some surprises on you. Yes, sir. Well, strangely enough, you get to the point where you never leave the drawing board. You can get up and walk away from it, but you never leave it, because there's always some unsolved situation which stays in your mind, and it stays there until it's resolved. So you could be bowling, you could be sleeping, you could be taking a bath. That situation stays with you, and that situation is part of your work. So you take your work with you wherever you go. I do three pages a day comfortably. I could possibly do more, but I'd rather not. I feel that that kind of thing constitutes a full schedule for me, and I'm happy to do that much and come up with a full schedule. Yes, sir.
What a question. Why don't I want anybody to photograph my paintings, the shadow paintings down in the room? It's very simple, because I don't want my paintings turning up on fanzine covers, that are unauthorized. And and I've done it before. People used to come in and take pictures of my work, sometimes even unpublished work that, should have been sold to someone else, and suddenly it pops up on a magazine cover that, it shouldn't be. So in order to keep that from happening, are we that bad? Jack, you better take over again.
Yeah.
One more question and then we'll draw.
Yes, I feel that one more question is, one more forthcoming question should kind of tie this thing up, and I know that you people would like to see other things and go to other places, and oh yeah, listen, we're going to draw. I forgot all about that, so just stick around for it. I'm glad Jim is here, because my wife isn't, and yeah, I'm the kind of guy whose mind has to be kept on what's to be done next. So I'm thankful for Jim being present. Yes, just one more question before we. Yeah. Yes, this young lady. Yes, ma'am. Yes, I'll give you the definitive answer on that. I am Captain America in that instant. I feel that whoever is involved in it and is sincerely trying to create something good, will put himself in that specific situation and come up with a very human solution, because it would be their particular solution, their very own.
What can you say about a man who created the most popular fictional character in 20th century America, second only to Walt Disney and his Mickey Mouse? I'm speaking, of course, of Jerry Siegel, who along with Joe Shuster brought Superman into being. Mr. Siegel did not speak formally at the San Diego Comic Convention, so we arranged a special recorded interview where I, Alan Light, and fan columnist Murray Bischoff spoke to Mr. Siegel, his lovely wife Joan, and their attractive daughter, Laura. The Siegels certainly top our list of the nicest people we've met in fandom.
We were young kids, and in order, if we wanted to see a movie, well, we had to sell milk bottles, and so we had this feeling that we were sort of like right there at the bottom, and we could sympathize with people who were in trouble, and that's what had something to do with the creation of Superman, who would help people in trouble.
I think that had a great appeal to people, because they were all hoping that someone would rescue them, or that inside them.
Yeah, well, so Superman grew out of our personal feelings about life, and that's why quite often when we saw these so many other similar strips coming out, we felt that perhaps they were imitating the form and format of Superman, but there was something that wasn't there, and that was this tremendous feeling of compassion that Joe and I had for the downtrodden and the people in trouble, and that is something that's in your heart and not in your pocketbook.
You were connected with the Superman strip until the war, is that correct?
That's right. Well, no, even longer, because when I came out of the war, I resumed my association. I was on a strip from from the very beginning all the way through to 1948, when we had our first legal action, and when I was away in the Army. That's when they began the system of ghosting, and there are some things I would love very, very much to say now, giving details of why I went off Superman, and that was the beginnings of it, but I guess I'll just have to save it for some other occasion. But anyway, so I worked on it from the very beginnings in 1938, though we actually started on the strip back in about 1933. It took us about 6 years approximately to sell the thing. I was on it until 1948, then I was off it for about 10 years. Then I went back on writing for national periodicals again in 1959, and I worked for them with no byline at regular page rates from 1959 through 1966.
Now, Mr. Schuster worked with you up until 48?
That's right. We were associated together for that full period.
How did he handle the artwork, say, after 1940, when it was obvious he was not doing it all himself?
Yeah, well, what happened, of course, is there was so much to be done. Obviously, he needed a staff. He did hire a staff, and he supervised them pretty closely. And sometimes people would make. Sometimes he would make sketches himself. On other occasions, other people would make sketches. And a number of the artists who did make the sketches, actually their sketches just weren't satisfactory, and Joe would work over them and almost completely alter them so they were almost recognizable. Now, readers may jump to the conclusion that, well, Joe Shuster didn't actually draw anything, other people worked on it, but the final result did have the spirit of Joe, and quite often he did do a great deal of work on it, and in many instances he insisted on inking the Superman heads and the heads of the other leading characters, at least for a long time. Oh yes, well, he got something almost mystical in his faces that I don't think anyone else has ever caught since.
We think that too much sophistication that came later was distracting and a deterrent rather than an addition. Up to a point it was good, but then they almost got Superman looking mean.
Yes, yes.
Well, there's a definite charm about the early.
Yes.
I would have preferred continuing doing it the way the thing was in the original, but great pressure was brought on Joe and I to conform to what they felt comic books should be, that the comic books should be closer to the pulp publications, so we had to endure that pressure.
About the Superman television show, do you have an opinion on that?
Well, then there again I started entering an area that I probably would go into in the book, my reactions to it, except it was tremendously frustrating to me to not be earning 1 cent from Superman and read in the paper that a $25 million deal had been signed while my family and I were practically on the verge of starvation.
Did you ever meet Mr. Reeves?
Joanne, you did that. My wife did, not I.
Strangely enough, long before he ever got to be Superman in television, I met him in Los Angeles, and we became very good friends. And he never knew that I had posed for Lois Lane. We never talked about that. We just, he was a bit player and a stand-in man, and he was doing movie work. And I was working in a club as a cigarette girl.
Years later,
And we became very good friends. He was like a brother to me, and he used to stop in every night, and we talked, and we became very good friends. And then years later, he became Superman on television, and it was strange because I had posed, and he never knew that.
Well, I started to say, and then there was a strange experience where my wife and I were walking down the streets of New York one day, and walking right toward us was George Reeves, the fellow who portrayed Superman on television. By the way, it's never been mentioned, or it hasn't been mentioned much, except in just a recent interview that appeared in the Sunday edition of the San Diego Union, that Joanne, my wife Joanne, was the original model for the Lois Lane character. When Superman was first appeared, she actually posed for the character for Joe, and so here you are, gentlemen, Lois Lane in the living, palpitating flesh.
My secret identity. Revealed at last. Yeah. Well, we were all youngsters then, and I was a skinny little kid, and I wanted to earn money on Saturdays, so I put an ad in the Situation wanted of the plain dealer, Cleveland Plain Dealer. Oh, yeah. And I didn't know anything about modeling, you know, but I was like Jerry and Joe, very gutsy for my age.
Good.
So I put an ad in, and I got a lot of mail, mostly from guys who wanted dates. Because I put attractive model. I figured I had to put something in to, you know, get some mail. So Joe wrote me a letter, and he said he was looking for a model to pose for a comic strip. And he would pay me $1.50 an hour, which was very good money then, you know.
It was like $1,500 an hour nowadays.
And I thought, well, that was pretty good, you know, for Saturday, because people used to work all day for that kind of money. So I posed in front of the bedroom mirror. I, you know, practiced different poses and memorized some. And meanwhile, I got the mail, and when I went up to Joe Shuster's place, my heart was pounding, you know, and so I knocked on the door, and boy, my size opened the door, wearing glasses, just opened it a crack, and I said, I'm the model Mr. Shuster wrote to. So he opened the door, and he motioned me in, and we started talking, and we hit it off right away. We were talking about movies, we were talking about everything, and I was thawing out, and a woman stuck her head out of the kitchen and said, hello, and an older woman, and a little girl ran through the living room, chased by a little boy, and ran out again. And we were talking for the longest time, and finally I said, does Mr. Shuster know I'm here? And he said, I'm Mr. Shuster. He was in senior high, and I was in junior high, but he was, you know, same height as I was, and, you know, and I thought he was just Mr. Shuster's younger brother, because I didn't know who Mr. Shuster was.
If you kept track of the Superman character today, if you just
I haven't watched it too closely because it's a traumatic thing for me. I have seen changes in the format, which I think that the change is almost made for the just for the sake of change itself, and I don't really think that it really tremendously is that much of an advance.
When things are real bad for us, if Superman came on television, we turn it off.
Well. Do you think that the way comic books are today, supposedly so much more sophisticated than we were in the old days, that your vision of Superman would be the proper one to go back to if you know, if you had some?
Well, if I had any say so, I see no reason at all why there couldn't be some editions of Superman that did follow that format. I don't think it would be harmful. It might even be helpful. and it might round out the character, and perhaps there might be millions of people out there who would like a more simpler, direct, but very powerful version of Superman.
You actually never had Superman as being totally invulnerable, or you know, as we had it, the robots could actually beat him down. They didn't fall apart as soon as he walked into the room. You prefer a more human.
Well, yes, from the very beginning. Superman himself had pretty much of a sense of humor about the whole thing, and one of the reasons why I gave him that attitude was because the whole concept in itself was such a wild thing. I felt that the only thing that would breathe any real life and believability into it is if Superman himself didn't take the whole thing that seriously. Except that he was very serious about helping people in trouble and distress, because that's the way I felt. Now, it has been said that Captain Marvel had a great deal of humor in it, and that Superman was absolutely humorless, but that just is not true. If you look back at the early stuff, you'll find that Superman was kidding around quite a bit when he was tearing tanks apart and kicking, airplane squadrons here and there and everywhere, and so there was a spirit of fun in the thing. And as a matter of fact, Joe and I, when we first started going in comics, we had intended to do comedy strips, so we were very comedy oriented, and that's why Superman did have this sort of comedy flair to it. And incidentally, on the matter of inaccuracies, there have been so many stories about the purported true inside authentic story of Superman that are just full of holes. So perhaps someday a lot of these things will be straightened out, these inaccuracies, perhaps in my own book, will be straightened out. You know, what is interesting about this interview is it really is a first, because Joe and I have been in seclusion for many years, for about 11 years or so, and I guess even before then, we didn't talk. We didn't talk too much, and there's just so much about our story that has never been told, and this is really the first time that we're touching on some of the aspects.
Right up. Okay, marvelous. We want to thank you so much for spending this little time with us.
And I want to thank you again so much. It was your column which really brought it all about. And I want to thank both of you so very much for not only the mentions that you gave me, which brought me here in the very first place, but some of the photographs that you've run in recent issues, such as of Shell and myself. I think you're two great guys. You're very warm-hearted, and as I've told Murray, I wouldn't be here except for your people, and particularly Murray and this column.
Chuck Norris, co-star with Bruce Lee in the film 5 Fingers of Death, was at the convention demonstrating his skills as a martial arts champion, and to speak. Here is some of what he had to say.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Well, it's really a pleasure being here at the Comic Con today, and I'm glad you enjoyed the movie. Bruce, who I've known for about 10 years now, in fact, first time I met Bruce was in New York City about 9 years ago when I was fighting. In fact, I was fighting for the world title, and that's when Bruce was doing the Green Hornet series, and he came back there as a celebrity guest. And after I won the title, the promoter introduced me to Bruce, and so we started talking about our philosophies and the martial arts and so forth. And anyway, we were both staying at the same hotel, the Americana in New York, and we started walking over to the hotel. As we got going up the elevator, I remember Bruce was staying on the 7th floor, and I was on the 9th. As we got to his floor, we were really getting pretty involved into our conversation. So instead of me going up, I stepped out in the hallway with him, and this is like 11:30 at night, and we started working out in the hallway. And next time I looked at my watch, it was 7 o'clock the next morning. And it was amazing because the guy he had so much knowledge and, as you know, on the screen, ability, that it seemed like an hour had gone by as far as us working out and exchanging ideas. So he said, well, when we get back to Los Angeles, why don't we start working out together, which we did. When I got back, we started training together, and then the series was canceled, and he went to Hong Kong to pursue a movie career. When he went to Hong Kong, his first movie, the biggest grossing movie in Asia, before Bruce went over there, was The Sound of Music. It had grossed $2.4 million, which again was the biggest movie ever grossed in the Orient. Bruce did the first movie called The Big Boss, which over here was The Fist of Fury, and that one grossed $3.2 million, which is $800,000 more than The Sound of Music. Then he did The Fist of Fury, which over here was called The Chinese Connection, and that one grossed $4.3 million. And then he called me up and he said he'd like to do a movie with a real good fight scene in the movie. I said, well, the only way we can have a fight scene is if, you know, if I get to hit you once in a while. And he said, well, yeah, naturally, you know, we'd make it a back-and-forth type fight. So anyway, that fight scene that you saw took us 5 days to do. And in Asia alone, the movie grossed over $11 million. It's the biggest grossing movie in the history of Asia, and they don't think anything will surpass it for a long time. Then Bruce naturally did Enter the Dragon, which was his last movie, and it was probably the biggest grossing movie as far as martial art movies go. But Bruce was 32 years old. Let me explain something about his death too, because there's, I guess, so many rumors that are going about how he passed away and so forth, about touch of death and drugs and so forth. And so I'd like to clarify that before we go on with the demonstration. Is Bruce in 1968? Well, he was pretty heavy in the weightlifting, as you could tell. He was very well built. And he was lifting weights one night with Karim Jabbar, who was a student of his when he was in Los Angeles, playing at UCLA. And he tried to lift too heavy weights, and he ruptured the disc in his back, and he was laid up in the hospital for 3 weeks. In fact, the doctor said that they didn't know if he'd be able to walk again or not. But of course, with a person like Bruce, who's got the drive and determination to achieve anything in life, he was up in about a month, and within 3 months, he was as strong as he ever was. But he had constant back pains from that day on, and he was having to take medication to keep the muscles in the back loose and relaxed. So what happened is that when he was in Hong Kong preparing for his next movie, he was working with a girl named Betty, and who was going to co-star with him, and he got a severe headache. So Betty gave him some antibiotics for the headache, and with the medication he had taken for his back and the medication he had taken for his headache, they reacted to each other and made his brain swell up, and it created an aneurysm or ruptured blood cells in his brain, and that's actually what happened. So if anyone asks you what happened, that you can tell them the true story.
At the banquet, June Foray, voice actress for the Rocky and Bullwinkle show and other cartoons, presented the Animation Award.
This has been a very nostalgic evening for me, thanks to Richard Butner and to Sheldorf. When I saw Chuck's picture, it also brought back memories of my Warner Brother days, and seeing Bob Clampett here, and Daws Butler, and Milt Gray, and everybody, and Don Foster from the Chuck Jones office, and all of the new friends that I've made here the past 3 years. It's been wonderful, and the evening is long, and I'm going to get right to the award. This man I have known for many, many years. We've been through thick and thin, and mostly thick these days. We went through the Stan Freberg years, the Warner Brothers years, the Capitol Records years, the Jay Ward years. We're still going through the Jay Ward years, and now we're going through the Comic-Con years. He's a man whom I can work with on the same microphone, and no engineer has to raise it or lower it, and it's very nice. I liken him to me. He's 5'4" and he's all mouth. Mr. Daws Butler. Say something in comic for us, Dawn.
Say what?
Say something in comic for us.
Something in comic. Well, I'll tell you, rather than do it myself, my friend Huckleberry Hound, who has just written his autobiography, he said he's a pretty young dog to write it, but why wait till the last minute? And he doesn't like to hurt anybody's feelings, so somebody asked him what he had to eat, and he said, mostly grits. He said, I like grits a little bit, just a little bit. There is no mark on a ruler small enough to show how much I like grits. But I like grits a little bit. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Science fiction writer, author of Psycho, Mr. Robert Bloch, gave a talk on Lovecraft.
I was asked to talk today particularly about H.P. Lovecraft now. I don't know whether or not Lovecraft has much meaning for most of the younger people, but I do know that he did play a part in the history of science fiction and fantasy, and that's what I'd like to consider. A long time ago, very long time ago, there was a book published called Golden Multitudes. What it is, what it was, is simply a record of all the bestsellers in this country, year by year. That's the reason for the title, the so-called Golden Multitudes. I was looking at it the other day. I came across 1928, and that wasn't a very vintage year for writing. There was no book that had achieved the sale of 1 million or more copies, which qualified it then for bestseller status. The books that were most popular in 28 were Earl Dare Bigger's Behind That Curtain, Vina Delmar's Bad Girl, and Ernest Dimnay's The Art of Thinking. Now, few of today's younger readers can identify the name of Earl Dare Biggers. He's been overshadowed by his creation, Charlie Chan. Fewer still would recognize the name of Vina Delmar. As for The Art of Thinking, you only have to take a look at the world around you to see how little influence that has had. But Lovecraft survives and flourishes. Books, magazines, biographies, essays, scholarly theses, in film, television, and comics, in work of writers that he knew, and in work of writers who were born after his death. My own relationship with Lovecraft goes way, way back. I was 15 years old, living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, when I read Lovecraft stories and weird tales and read in the letter column about other stories that had been published previously. Nowhere to get them. There were no paperbacks, no reprints. Wrote to the magazine, they didn't have any copies. So I decided to write my first fan letter to Lovecraft, and I did. And it was one of those, Dear Mr. Lovecraft, I always admired your work, and where can I read your other stories, sort of thing. I got an answer. Not only an answer, but a very lengthy and cordial letter. He said, here is a list of my stories that I'm enclosing. Any of them that you wish to borrow, I'll be happy to lend to you. Incidentally, I am moving within a few weeks, and I've been in the process of cataloging my fantasy library. And here is a list of the books in that library. Would you be interested in borrowing any of those? Well, this was quite a thing for a 15-year-old kid in the Middle West to get from a writer whom he had always esteemed and thought to be famous in that great world of the printed page.
At the banquet was the spirit's own Will Eisner.
I was asked to bring samples of my artwork here. I thought maybe I could sell a few pages. They told me a big publisher was out here, a fellow named Stan Lee, who I heard does some comic books, and I thought maybe I'd sell a few pages to him. He said, I'm not ready. Serves me right. I said that to a young fellow back in 1937 or 38 who wrote to me from Cleveland. He said he had some comics and he was going to Cleveland Art School at that time, and I wrote him a long letter and told him that the two features that he had were very good starts, but he should spend another year at Cleveland Art School. A fellow named Siegel, and he had two comic strips called Spy and Superman. Oh boy, was I right. I'd like to say something serious. I've been saying that all day. And now I've got somebody to listen to me. I believe, speaking largely for the comic artists, comic books, that we are now on a threshold of a whole new era in comics.
I feel very strongly, I believe very firmly, that we've just come through a big era of great comic art, and with the rather long overdue recognition of comic art as an art form, or what I like to call sequential art, that we are facing now a whole new emergence of this art form into many new things. I think one of the first things we'll see, which was begun by the underground and is at the moment in a little bit of a hiatus, but will emerge again, is the treatment of new and more sophisticated subjects. For 35 years, comic art or comic books have devoted themselves entirely to one theme: crime does not pay. We found out that that's all wrong. There's got to be a new reordering of our intellectual editorial priorities. You hear that, Stan?
I'll get equal time.
I'm going to keep talking till you faint.
You always do.
I have an impediment in my speech. It's Stan. I really am, I must say, and I'm not being modest at all, I'm embarrassed because the slides I brought are nothing but examples of some of the things I've done. And who wants to see that? You can go down in the dealer's room and see that. I'll flash them quickly. Everybody's tired. We've all had a wonderful time. I'm exhausted with nostalgia, and I'm sure you all are. I will ask the people who have got the slides, so let's run through them real fast. Well, in case if there's a slight delay, I'll let Stan say something. It'll go on till noon.
You got yourself into it? Get out of it.
The San Diego Comic Convention of 1975 was certainly a fun, exciting, and memorable experience for all who attended.
This piece of artwork I did
host Richard Butler,
somewhere around 1910.
A great deal of praise. If you were there, you know. And if not, I hope you can attend in the coming year.